Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Help Ensure Patient Identity with Dynamic Intelligence. We have with us today from LexisNexis Healthcare, Courtney Timms, who is the Director of Healthcare Strategy for Identity and Access Management. How patients access retail pharmacies changed dramatically just in 5 years. Patients are using their cell phones, their laptops, they're using tablets, all sorts of different electronic devices to request scripts, refills, appointments, see lab results, or just get in touch with their provider. And of course, when you do that using those devices, there's always the opportunity for identity theft or other sorts of shenanigans. And Courtney's going to tell us how we can protect against that. Before we get started, just some brief audience instructions. This presentation is being recorded. You will be able to see it and share it again with your associates. We'll have something available for you a couple of hours after the broadcast. We will take questions, so start thinking about what questions you might want to ask as Courtney presents, and use the Q&A function that is on the lower left-hand side of your screen. Underneath the presenter headshots. So just simply enter your question and we'll do our best to get to them. If we can't get to all of them, we will get them back to Courtney and LexisNexis and they'll come back to you as best they can. That's it. Courtney, are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right, take it away.
So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on protecting patients in the digital era. My name is Courtney Timms, as John mentioned, and I am Director of Market Planning, or in other words, Market Strategy here at LexisNexis Healthcare. I've been in strategy majority of my career, but I've been hyper-focused on this specific topic within the last 5 years within the healthcare market specifically. As data becomes more consumerism and the need to protect that data, it's something that we're extremely focused on here at LexisNexis. So I'm happy to be here with all of you. On the agenda today, so we'll be discussing some of the market trends that we're seeing both in pharmacy and in healthcare overall. Then I want to spend a brief moment both defining and highlighting the difference between physical and digital identity. And even though today's presentation is specifically addressing the digital identity, the two play separate but equal parts in your security strategy and approach. So we're going to talk a little bit through that. We'll then dive into components of a digital profile and what capabilities you should be looking for when scouting vendors to fill this gap within your security strategy. Then we'll discuss various touch points where this type of technology can be most useful within your workflow. And then at a high level, we'll talk through some of the value that this type of technology can afford you and your organization. And then we'll open the floor for any questions. I do have 2 poll questions in here. Please feel free to participate. It just makes for a lot more interesting conversation. And then, as John mentioned, feel free to enter, like you said, any questions that you guys might have. I will try to answer questions throughout, but I did leave time at the end to do so as well. So a couple weeks after receiving a COVID test, a patient of a national pharmacy received a text message requesting patient feedback on their experience. The text stated that respondents would receive a $100 reward, and the message ended with a link to the survey. The patient proceeded to click the link, rerouting them to a separate website where the patient input their credentials inclusive of the username and password associated with their account. Months later, the pharmacy announced they had been victim of a network security incident. The incident resulted in hackers who remotely shut down the pharmacy system, holding patients' data and pharmacy history hostage for a ransom. As a result, all patients were being asked to reset access credentials and would be notified with next steps for further investigation. Over a year later, media published an article stating that the hack resulted in the pharmacy paying $1.2 million in Bitcoin to hackers, in addition to a settlement with the Office of Civil Rights and HIPAA violations, and a possible class action lawsuit. Now, some of you are probably thinking that what are the chances of this actually happening? We hear these stories all the time with financial institutions, insurance companies, e-commerce organizations, and even now gas companies. But who's focused on healthcare or pharmacy for that matter, right? And even if this is something that you could see happening, is it worth the investment, right? Hackers focus on large brands where they can get the most money. You might not think your organization is a large focal point or even on the radar for a hacker. But that's where many healthcare companies or organizations kind of hit a roadblock, right? They're thinking it can't be me, right? It's not going to be me. And that's what a lot of healthcare organizations have run into many mistakes, especially pre-COVID, when it felt like every day there was a media headline about a financial institution or e-commerce organization announcing that they had been compromised, right? For the longest time, healthcare has flown below the radar. And because let's face it, like, who cares about patients' medical history, right? Like, can they really do with that, especially considering there's things of more value out there, right? Like credit card information. But as John mentioned earlier, identity theft is a real thing. And that information to steal a person's identity exists within the electronic health record, but also where a lot of hackers are hacking into healthcare organizations is not necessarily, it could be to steal the identity of patients, but it also is to hold that organization's information for ransom, threatening to leak system data or information unless ransom is paid. And that's what the top trend that we're seeing amongst the healthcare organizations. So for the longest time, like I said, healthcare has flown below the radar. And a lot of this is for several reasons, right? Industries such as financial and insurance and e-commerce organizations have invested heavily in cybersecurity and a lot are more sophisticated than most healthcare organizations. And that makes healthcare an easier target and a lot less of a hassle for hackers looking for a quick win. Also, during the pandemic, the adoption of remote healthcare, such as telepharmacy and patient portals, has skyrocketed with an influx of patients and healthcare employees interacting with their healthcare digitally. And what that means is more data and information being accessed, managed, and stored virtually. People are signing in from various networks, unsecured Wi-Fi, and performing recreational searches on professional devices. For example, checking your personal email with compromised links, and then going back to doing work and business, and then interacting with, let's say, their pharmacy portal or via their web browser or a mobile application, right? What this instant adoption also led to was an overwhelmed systems that were not built to necessarily handle the high traffic or the risk that it comes with. And then specific to pharmacy, more patients are seeking primary care and medical attention from local pharmacies to avoid the hassle of going to a traditional provider. So where the provider might interact with a patient 2 times a year, a pharmacy might see that patient upwards of 20 times or have 20 more interactions or touch points with that patient. So with that comes more data, with that comes more value. These are 2 headlines that kind of show what we're seeing on a grander scale. And this is 2 of thousands that I could have chose from. But the first is a lawsuit where the claims have made that a baby was actually became brain dead because the umbilical cord was wrapped around the neck. And what the lawsuit says is during that time, the hospital system was actually going through a ransomware attack, and it prevented the doctors and the nurses from being able to test and be notified as it would, so they could provide proper care because of this ransomware. And then a Georgia hospital reporting that they're experiencing 550 daily cyber attempts through their Epic MyChart system. And so these are the headlines that we're really dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and where it's becoming more prominent in the healthcare space than ever before. So we need to start looking at patients as consumers, right? Which actually might be easier for the retail pharmacy than for some of our friends in the payer and provider space. But nowadays, statistics show that 60% of patients are choosing healthcare providers based on a strong online presence, with telehealth claims increasing 3,000%. And we don't think this trend is going to drastically change, as majority of patients are actually very satisfied with the service that they're receiving. Telehealth received 82% patient satisfaction versus 44% with in-person visits. With the increase in consumerism within healthcare, so too comes the risk of, and instead of viewing our industry as drastically different from those of our financial industry or the financial industry or e-commerce organizations, these trends should highlight where we are becoming most alike. And in some regards, our differences are more severe, as credit card theft is very different than a potential of a patient's life. So where a hack could mean not having access or tampering with patient medication, hacking incidents comprised more than half of all last year's patient data breaches. 18 million patient records were impacted by ransomware attacks, which was a 470% increase in 2019. The average initial ransomware demand is 4.5 million, with an average ransomware payout of 910,000, which this is not inclusive of any government fines, civil lawsuits, or fees paid to the investigation agencies or reputational damage. So here, although these numbers, are here on the screen, this is not in full. Does not fully caption what the cost or the detriment is to the healthcare organization after a hack or a ransomware attack occurs. But here's our first polling question. What tactics is your organization using to prevent cyber fraud during remote patient engagements? All righty, so username and password, several username or password. I do see some device authentication, which is great. And majority say a combination of what's above. So that's awesome. And that's definitely the direction that we want our customers or our clients going. Is we really highly recommend a multi-factored approach, which I think is great, right? And I think we're seeing more of an adoption of a multi-factor approach as organizations really strive for the NIST IL2 standard of guidelines. So that just goes to show you kind of how security has changed over time, where initially our conversation with our clients was trying to convince them that single factor authentication, like username and password, was just not enough. They needed multi-factor. Well, now that conversation has shifted to where we're not having the conversation around single versus multi-factor. Now we're having the conversation of protecting your physical identity versus a digital identity, and building a strategy around security that encompasses or is inclusive of both. So I think that's great. So when I talk to clients about building their security strategy, I like to use the analogy of a house. Centuries ago, a front door and a fence was all that we felt we needed to protect our homes, right? As time and risk and technology has evolved, so too has the way we think about security. We have invested in motion security lighting, alarm devices, cameras. I even get alerted on my phone when a squirrel passes through my yard. But you know what? I would invest in anything that meant protecting my home, the people and the things that I love from potential danger. And so in this similar fashion, right, we want to start thinking about all of the investments, what it takes to protect, right, not just our home, but our virtual home or our work home as well, and how far we're willing to go into protecting that home or that system, that patient's data. So similarly, as technology and crime has evolved, so has the fraud we're seeing in the healthcare space today. We've talked extensively about ransomware, where a malicious software accesses a system and is designed to block access to a computer system until the sum of money is paid. This can happen when a compromised device accesses your system, whether it be via a patient or employee device, and it can happen without the user even knowing that their device has been compromised. Botnet is a group of interconnected devices which work in tandem to launch coordinated attacks. An example of this is if username and passwords have been compromised on the black web or on the dark web, bots have the ability to attempt thousands of username and password combinations within seconds, trying to access your system, right? Phishing is a fraudulent practice of sending emails pretending to be from a reputable company, or text messages in our earlier example, to induce individuals into revealing personal information. And then we have distributed denial of service. And this is disruption of the normal traffic of a site, of a targeted server, or network by overwhelming the target or its surrounding infrastructure with a flood of internet traffic. So essentially leaving that system disabled. And they usually do this and then either ask for ransom or at that time steal information, whether it be patient's identity or internal secured network information, so that they can then perform further attacks on the system. These are common cyber attacks within the healthcare system, but these are only 4, right? There are dozens and dozens more, and it's constantly changing. Hackers are continuing to develop codes, continuing to develop or create new hack methods to try to get consumers or patients or even employees to divulge information so that they can then hack into a system and perform any of these fraudulent attacks on your system. So enough with the doom and gloom. Let's focus on what we can actually do about it, right? And where we should be really building our strategy. Let's start with understanding that each and every person who interacts online has 2 identities. The physical, which consists of your name, your date of birth, your phone number, your address, your SSN, your gender. And the second is our digital identity, which consists of things like our email address, our account details, like your credentials, your username and password, your IP address, the device, the physical device that you're using, and your behavior profile when you're actually using that device, which we'll talk about on a later slide. But several years ago, you might have sat through sales presentations where knowledge-based authentication and one-time password was the latest and greatest investment. And they are still really, really effective in verifying and authenticating someone's physical identity. But those security strategies need to evolve to include digital identity as well. And so that's what we're here to talk about, majority of our solution today. Our second poll question, are you confident with your organization and that it's currently equipped to handle and protect your patient's health from the type of fraudulent activity that we talked about today? So 60% of you said no, and 40% said yes. Thank you so much for participating. Hopefully the rest of this information can kind of show you what the possibilities are and how you can evolve that strategy to be a little bit more confident in your ability to protect the data from these type of attacks. So let's talk about the components and capabilities that will allow you to effectively address the digital, and we do this by building what we call a digital profile, which consists of the device that's being used, whether it be a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, a mobile phone. Like I said, the behavior of the person leveraging the device to access the information, and then a global network, which in going back to our house analogy, we could consider this our neighborhood watch program. And so we'll dive into each of these on the following slides. So the first is analyzing the device being used to access your network. Whether it be a mobile phone, a laptop, a desktop, or a tablet, any patient or employee device should be assessed prior to allowing it to access sensitive HIPAA-protected data or your internal network systems. Device authentication software is the best technology to add a first layer of security to your workflow because it happens as soon as the end user accesses the mobile app or the website. And it's completely behind the scenes, so as not to cause any friction to what the patient or employee is trying to accomplish. The software checks the device for any implanted malware or ransomware that might have been planted without the end user's knowledge. It checks for the location of the device. So for instance, if your pharmacy is a local pharmacy that is located in, let's say, like Cary, North Carolina, yet the device accessing the portal account is located internationally, that might be considered a red flag of potential fraud. And this technology is also designed to look at a user attempting to access the account via a proxy or VPN to hide their digital identity. It looks to see if the history on their computer or device has been cleared as any indication that they might be trying to hide something. This technology can also analyze the security that is built into the device. For instance, if the person using the device passed or failed their fingerprint or password security on their phone that's built into their device, or other remote devices like their security or their password username combination into their laptop, right, to indicate that the device might have actually been a stolen device. Surprisingly, there's over 900 different checks that this technology can perform on each and every device entering your network, and the user is never impacted, and it happens in real time. The next thing we want to look at is the behavior of the person using the device. So similar to the above, we analyze location. If I live in Atlanta, and that is where I normally log in, but all of a sudden it's getting indication that I'm attempting to log in from Alaska or California, that might be a red flag, right? Or even over time. So if I'm logging in from Atlanta and then within 3 minutes, it's getting a login from a different country internationally, or even within the country in California, like the last example, chances are I didn't go from Atlanta to California or Atlanta to China in 3 minutes, and that might be indication of a potential fraudulent activity. Technology also looks at keyboard strokes, the speed and the cadence of which someone types, whether their user is typing their information into an application form. So if the end user is actually going on to create an account, if it's my information, I'm typically going to type in my name, address, SSN, phone number, whereas a person who doesn't necessarily own that identity might copy and paste. And so those are things that we're starting to track. Majority of people also don't use complex keystrokes to maneuver through a page, things like Shift plus Tab or Central C or Central V. We use our mouse typically, right, to maneuver through a web page. And so hackers leverage these keystrokes, complex keystrokes, a lot more than your normal activity user, right? We also look at mouse movements. Bots tend to move in sharp, straight lines, often clicking on a button or a particular place on a page in the same exact place over and over and over again within seconds. A real human has curvature in the way that they move their mouse, and we click on the same button in different spots, right? We analyze right and left clicks, how fast a person maneuvers through the page. This is all some things that we track or that technology can track through mouse movements. We look at touch screens. So we focus on swipes and the thickness of the finger or stylus pen being used. And then if you can believe it, your device has sensors built in. So as it has a compass, it also has sensors that track how high you typically hold your phone or device when it's in use. This information, what it does is helps us to build what we call a digital profile. And once we have that digital profile and leverage things like knowledge-based authentication or a one-time password to verify and authenticate the physical identity upon first use, we're able to not only leverage this device identity to validate the person each and every time that they visit your site for consistency. So at any point in time, we see an interaction, whether they're logging in or trying to perform what we would consider a high-risk transaction, like changing their password or electronically sending their health information outside of your network. We're bouncing that interaction against what we know as the typical consistent behavior of the end user and highlighting differences because those might be potential of fraudulent activity. And not to mention, this is happening within seconds and is completely behind the scenes, so the end user doesn't even know that it's happening. Lastly, you want a vendor with a global network of customers that spans across industries. This is an example of the network at LexisNexis, but many organizations have something similar. What this network allows you to do is take every interaction with a device and ask the network questions like, have you seen this device before? What do you know about this device? Has it been associated with fraud in the past? When was the last time you've seen the device, and was it located in the same place that it's requesting access from now? So even if it's your first time seeing the device, it's not our first time seeing the device. This is extremely useful for healthcare organizations because patients are not accessing healthcare portals as often as, let's say, their Netflix account or their bank account or their credit card company. So this network allows you to gain machine learning knowledge from some of the largest brands in the world, and that's value within seconds, right? Because if Walmart or Home Depot or Target labels it as a fraudulent device, you're leveraging from that information. And so the larger the network, the more value it brings to your security strategy. So now that we talked about what's possible with the technology that exists today, let's talk about where to put it. Right? When talking to customers, best practice is to focus on touch points, right? And so the first is when the account is initially created, right? That's where we're capturing so much information to build that profile so that in later transactions, we're having something to bump it up against. And so typically, if you think about patients or employees and why they're accessing your network, it's to review or fill a prescription, schedule an appointment with a pharmacist, schedule a vaccination or testing, or an employee is accessing or updating patient information. Placing this technology as the first thing in the workflow helps you to prevent any new account fraud by analyzing the full application context, including the device, the behaviors, and the location, while immediately identifying any digital risk that the transaction or the device might be associated with. It helps you to trust good consumers. So IDing fraudulent applications, but also ensure that the frictionless application experience of legitimate users is preserved, right? So you don't want your end patient or employee going through layers and layers of frictionful security if really they shouldn't be. They're a legitimate user. And so this all happens behind the scene, adding no additional friction to majority of your patients, which are doing nothing more than what they're supposed to be doing. It also helps protect against fraud. So helping prevent organization of fake accounts, linking IP addresses and leveraging fraud models to identify fraudulent profiles and behavior. So we're really looking for consistency there against our global network. And then having full visibility as to the legitimacy of users that are being seen by the organization for the first time, leveraging that global network to kind of help you make those decisions. The second place to leverage this technology is during login. So we're identifying trusted and returned users, detecting the device in the location and the behavior that correlates with the user's historical behavior within the firm and across our global network. Fraud is often preceded by multiple logins from a fraudster, so recognizing login activity with a persistent device identifier. And we're looking for anomalies which may indicate a fraudster has obtained a user's login credentials or is tracking an unsuspecting user into making a payment or any social engineering. So essentially what we're doing here is, one, we're looking for consistency. And two, even if a user's or a patient or employee's username and credentials have, username and password have been compromised, we have 900 plus other data points that we can judge whether that transaction is fraudulent or not. We're not solely relying on the credentials being used to actually log in. And at that point, if certain fraudulent activity could be suspected or detected, you can require them to go up to a step-up authentication. For instance, if a user is logging in from a different device using those same credentials, we can say, you know, Courtney Timmons, we see that you're logging in from a different device. We would like to send you a one-time password just to verify that you are actually Courtney Timmons, right? So it's that step-up authentication where we're not doing away with knowledge-based authentication or one-time passwords, but we're adding to it, right? Last but not least, during account management, we classify this anytime a user wants to perform something we deem as high risk, such as changing their password or sending their electronic health record, which we expect to see a lot more of within the industry as the movement toward interoperability and the Cures Act, which requires payers and providers to be able to collect and request healthcare data via an API at the patient's consent, becomes or grows in popularity. During these types of transactions, this technology helps us to detect malware on a legitimate user's device and detect activities like bots or scripted mechanisms and takeover attempts in the mobile channel. Also, identify user changes. So where digital credentials such as email and phone are used as authentication, continue to risk assess those details and any changes that are made to them. And then we're going to complete an ongoing risk assessment that can be used for decisioning either during a particular session or at a later date. So what this means are, for instance, if we do a run on a check during the transaction on the device and everything checks out to the device, even though they've gotten into your mobile application or your portal, we're continuing to run tests even during that time. So let's just say they got past the username and password portion. If at any point we detect throughout that interaction that there's some type of fraudulent behavior, if they go and, let's say, try to change, name, address, any contact information, or send out any high-risk HIPAA protected information, we can stop it at that point of the transaction. So the point here is security does not only stop at username and password and access, it continues throughout the entire interaction with the remote user. So here, valuing patients in today's time is valuing and investing in their security as well. And so this type of technology helps to reduce the risk of fraud loss and portal abandonment. It helps expose fraud earlier in the patient journey. It helps make the right real-time customer trust decision. It improves patient experience with frictionless engagement, and it extends intelligence to your mobile channels. And this is really the goal when looking for vendors or looking to expand your security strategy to include device and digital identity as well. And now I will open the floor for any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Courtney. I like the way, first of all, you scared me a little bit. But what I really like is the way you quantified the threat. And it's very real. I think you said 18 million, I wrote it down, 18 million patient records were impacted. And then another stat you gave was that 60% of consumers are choosing pharmacies that have a strong online presence. So clearly, this isn't going away. We're only going to become more digitally enabled. We're going to be using this more and more. So if we don't figure out a way to protect ourselves, we're going to have a problem. And you gave us a lot of solutions. We have a few questions, so I'm going to get to those. The first one. If our organization invested in this kind of technology, does that mean we do not need to continue to invest in things like knowledge-based authentication or one-time passwords?
No. So as I mentioned earlier, knowledge-based authentication quizzes, things like one-time passwords are instrumental in helping us verify and authenticate physical identity attributes. This is really to help supplement that with addressing the digital fraud pieces that we're starting to see trend within the network or within the healthcare industry, and not just healthcare, right? Financial, insurance, e-commerce, all of these industries have seen this before, and so it's really to be inclusive of your investment in knowledge-based authentication and one-time password, not an either or. It really should be a both.
Okay. How much friction does this add to the patient experience?
Yeah, so it adds no friction, right, to the end user. The only time the end user sees friction is when the transaction through the 900 plus checks that we run is deemed as a possible fraudulent attempt, to where we would recommend doing a step-up authentication, which might consist of your knowledge-based authentication or one-time password. That's where the user would see the friction. But all throughout the device assessment piece, the end user is not feeling any friction, and they don't even know that it's happening in the background, right? So they can maneuver through the page, log in, create the account without any knowledge that this is going on.
Excellent. Does device and behavior assessment infringe on a patient's privacy at all?
No. So the way the technology works right now is that it doesn't infringe on any privacy. So we're watching the movements of the mouse, but we can't actually see the screen or what's being typed. And then we don't, technology is built so that it's not tracking like the letters being used or typed out in the keyboard monitoring, so much as it's tracking some of those special character keys, such as your central, your alt, your F1, F2, you know, keys that people don't typically use, but there's no way that the technology can actually track you know, what's being typed into the username or password or what information is being put on the screen, so much as it's just tracking the movements and the speed of those motions.
All right. So we can protect everybody's privacy and keep everybody happy and safe.
Correct.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Courtney Timmons, Director of Healthcare Strategy for Identity and Access Management at LexisNexis Healthcare. This was great. Let's do it again. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Look for coverage tomorrow in Drugstore News. We'll have a link so that you can share it with your associates. Everyone be well. Be safe.